Michelle.
Hi, Brenda.
It's been what? How many years since we met? When we met once, because when you came down, or when you guys started going to Woodbridge, to FBC Woodbridge, we had been gone, or I had been anyway, for quite a while. But girls, we met. Phyllis had a little gone away party thing when they were getting ready to come down here, and I went back up to Virginia for that, and that's how I got to meet Michelle and her husband. I think we sat at the same table, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. We did.
Yeah. So anyway, I have been down here for 8 years now. We live out here on the lake, single family home. You met my husband Frank, and we have 3 grown boys with families and 11 grandchildren.
Wow. Fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rossi, are you next?
Oh, okay. Rossi, are you? Okay, there you
go. Okay. I had to get used to turning my mic on. My name is Rossi. I have 2 adult daughters, a 20-year-old and 24-year-old. My 24-year-old is having her first child in July. Let's see. I have a single family home, and I've been here 7 years.
Cool. Good. Okay.
I think Robin, are you there?
Yeah. Robin, unmute yourself.
I thought I did. There we go. Michelle, I have a husband and 2 little boys. Bryant is 8 and Josiah is 4. We live in a single family home kind of out in the country. We have neighbors that we can walk to their houses. It's not that far, but not like really close housing. And I'm a kindergarten teacher, so I have a lot of opportunity to get to know people that way too.
Great. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Misty?
Hi, I'm Misty Ritchie. I am a mother of 2 grown children. My daughter is 24 and my son is going to be 41 next month. I have a grandson that's 2. I'm divorced since 2011, and I work for a tractor manufacturer, and I travel all over the Southeast. I live in an apartment since February.
Great.
Okay. Thank you, Misty. Michelle?
Hey, I'm Michelle. So I have lived on the same property for 28 years.
Wow.
We live out in the country in a church community. Like Poplar Springs Baptist Church is on our road a mile from my house, and our road is called Poplar Springs Road. I have 2 grown children and 1 16-year-old son who thinks he's grown. My 2 oldest are girls. One's 25 and the other is 22. And I've been married for 28 years.
Wow. Okay. Good.
Marsha?
Can you hear me?
Yep, sure can.
Hi, I'm Marsha Lovell. I've been married for 21 years to my husband, Steve, and I have 2 sons, one college age, 19, and one finishing junior. We have been in Greenwood for 6 years now, I believe, and we live in a neighborhood in a single family home. That's all I can think of. I'm a stay-at-home mom, homeschooler for the last 8 years, and currently retiring from that. So.
Good. Good.
Chat and Holly?
Cassidy, but everybody calls me Chat. I am 28. I live in a apartment complex, kind of surrounded by other different apartment complexes, and I've been there for 3 years. I've been in Greenwood since August of 2010 when I came to Lander here for college. And that's me.
And I'm Holly. I'm 35 and not married, but I live with a roommate in a townhouse. So we have families on top of us that we share parking spaces with and all of that. And I moved into this place, I think it's been 3 years now, and been in Greenwood since November of 2012.
Okay.
And Michelle, Holly has been instigator in our women's ministry here at New Spring and women's Bible studies, and she just recently changed her job here at the church. But did you want to tell her about that, Michelle?
Oh, sure. I've been working. I moved to Greenwood because of New Spring with my job, and I've transitioned from kids ministry to I was just our campus pastor's assistant, and so I just moved to a new position. It's called our connections director, which leads like a lot of our, I guess you'd call it hospitality ministry inside our church, like the greeters, parkers, ushers, those faces that you see on Sunday morning and make connection with. So I just transitioned to that beginning of April. So I'm learning new ropes.
Yeah, that's exciting. Yeah.
So any advice you have?
That's great.
Oh, and Aaron. Your turn, babe.
The microphone wants to go away. Hi, I'm Erin, and my husband and I, we've been married for almost 11 years now. We've been here in Greenwood for a little over 7 years now, but we have two little ones. We have a 5-year-old little girl and a 1.5-year-old little boy, and I get to stay home with them. Right now, my husband is actually our campus pastor of the church of New Spring, and so we live in a single family home in a neighborhood, but we're kind of on like the outside road of our neighborhood, so it's kind of like near the entrance point. We have like our own little road, and then you kind of go back into the whole neighborhood. And we've lived here for about like 4.5 years now, I guess, in this house. So yeah.
Good.
But thank you for speaking to us.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Whoops. Okay, Michelle, I'm going to give you the floor, okay?
Okay. So before we begin, let me just open us up in prayer.
Okay.
Father, I just thank you for this time that you've given us. I thank you for technology. May we use it well. Thank you for the ways that you work in the details of things, and I just pray that technology would work well tonight. I thank you for the gift of women in our lives who walk alongside us, who walk this journey with us, Father. Thank you for Phyllis and for Brenda and for their investment and women who are coming alongside and even behind them. And I'm just excited to share what you have given us. And I just pray that the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart would be acceptable in your sight, O God, my rock and my redeemer. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So, if at any time you guys want to stop and ask a question or whatever, feel free to unmute yourselves and stop me at any point. But I think what I'll do is I'll just kind of share a little bit about our story. And then I have some different things, like practical ways to get started or to continue in neighboring. And so one of my favorite stories that I love to share is so my husband is military. We've been in 27 years and we're still plugging along here for a few more years. It's so fun because I can look outside. We live on base right now, and I can look outside, and we counted. There were 9 little girls outside. They were not really physically distancing themselves, but they were all outside riding bikes just a few minutes ago. And so being on a military installation it's a safe, secure, kind of ultimate gated community. And so And so it's just fun to kind of interact and to see the kids and everything. But we moved to South Carolina. It was our first duty station, and I had 2 small children, and I was pregnant with a third. And so a neighbor across the street, her name was Deanna, she invited me over one day for coffee. And so as excited as I was about getting to know her, I didn't drink coffee. And so I worried the whole week, like, what am I going to do when she offers me coffee? And I don't even, I don't drink coffee. I don't even know how to drink coffee. And so I worried about it the whole week. And so when I got to her house, she led me out into the backyard, and she had this beautiful spread, and she served lemonade. And so I realized then that the invitation was not for coffee, but it was for friendship. And so that just kind of started me on, like really valuing the importance, and it made me feel like I was welcome in the neighborhood, like I had somebody on my side. She had small children as well, and so it really just kind of formed a bond with us, and made me feel like I was special, like I belonged in the neighborhood. And so I've always kind of remembered that story, that we're inviting people in for friendship. It's not about the fanciness of your house or what you can serve or anything like that, but people are craving relationships. And I think we've seen that in this pandemic time, that even though we can't get together like we normally do, people are figuring out how to stay connected, because they're also figuring out that that's of utmost importance in our lives, is that we stay connected with people. And so so since that time, we have lived in lots of different communities, lots of different houses. And I remember we moved to England, and then a few years later we moved to Norway. And so by that time my children were small, and we had a next door neighbor. And so, as we do in America, during holidays, they baked cookies and they took them over to the neighbor, and the neighbor immediately got out her wallet to pay my children. And so culturally, it was just like the Norwegians didn't know what to do with these friendly American neighbors who wanted to bring over, some cookies. And so, they thought that they had to pay for the cookies. And so we had a hard time, trying to explain to them, like, no, we don't, we don't want your money. We just want to be friendly, and we want to get to know you. And so from there, we've just kind of moved different places, and like I said, had different experiences. And so I think, and we have been intentional in reaching out to our neighbors, but I think what really kind of pivoted us into to really focusing on it is, several years ago we were actually living in Woodbridge, going to First Baptist Woodbridge, and that's where I had met Phyllis. And I was out visiting my one of my daughters who lived in Phoenix at the time, and I saw a book in her bookstore at her church, and it was called The Art of Neighboring, by Dave Runyon and Jay Pathak. And so I picked it up and I read it on the plane home. And by the time I got home, I just thought, wow, like this is such a wealth of great information. And I really wanted to kind of do a lot of what they said. And the basic gist of this book, have any of you read The Art of Neighboring? Have you? Okay. And I have a couple of resources, some other books that I would highly recommend. And so I will get those to you, Phyllis. Maybe you can send them out in an email or something like that. But The Art of Neighboring, basically, the gist of it is, it came from a group of pastors in the Denver, Colorado area. And they went to their mayor and they asked their mayor, how can we, as these big mega churches, how can we make an impact on our city? And the mayor told them, if you could get your people to be good neighbors, then I think that that's what would change our city. And so basically they came away thinking, so the mayor of our city has just told us what Jesus told us to do. And, it took the mayor to remind us what Jesus told us to do, to love our neighbors. And so, and kind of the premise of the whole study is, what if Jesus meant to love your actual neighbors, like those who actually live next door to you? And so that's kind of where Mike and I really started focusing on. And again, you can, hospitality and neighboring it can be, you know, to those that you work with, or to those in your church name, you know, your church family, or to those in other areas. But it also, you know, is very applicable to people who live actually right next door to you. And so when we were in Woodbridge, we started reaching out to people who were actually next door to us. And one thing that we found is that these were not people that we necessarily would have chosen for our neighbors. A lot of times they were very different from us. You know, we were a married couple. We had 5 children, and you know, some of them weren't married. Some of them, you know, were living together. And there was one. Our next door neighbor was a mom. I think she was like 78, and her daughter, who was in her 40s, they lived together right next door to us. And so it wasn't like people that we would have chosen. But Acts 17:26 is kind of our key verse that we have always kind of our go-to verse. And in the NIV, and I know that through the years, you know, they keep changing the you know, every time the Bible changes, and they update the translation, it changes a little bit the wording. But a few years ago, Acts 17:26 said that God has determined the exact times and places where we should live. And so that was key for us. Like God has determined the exact time and place that we should live right here. And so for that reason, we have these neighbors. And these are the people that we're supposed to reach out to. And so once we got to Woodbridge and started kind of being intentional to do this, we also came across another family that we had met who lived down the street. They were in the Navy, and they had 5 children, and they were basically, you know, us about 10 years, you know, behind us. And so we kind of partnered with them, and we started doing like a monthly neighborhood dinner. And one month we would have it at their house, and then the next month we would have it at our house. And we would do it every Sunday evening. And we would just invite anybody who wanted to come. And sometimes the next door neighbor would come, and she would bring some of her relatives with her. She would bring some of her friends with her. People down the street would come. And so it was, you know, we just enjoyed it so much, and we really got to know those people who were living right next door to us. Something else that I also did at that time, which Phyllis was a part of, is I started having a tea group. I'm an avid connoisseur of tea. And so once a month on a Friday morning around 10 o'clock, I would just have tea for whoever wanted to come. And so we would have people from the neighborhood who would come, people from the church who would come. Again, my next door neighbor, who was 78 years old at the time, I don't know if you were there, Phyllis, but one day she came up my back, and we lived in a house where you had to walk up these steps to get to the back door. So she comes walking up the back door, and behind her is this 21-year-old girl from Eastern Europe who was one of the lifeguards at our pool, at our HOA pool. And so she said, I just met her when I was down, you know, doing my exercise walking, and I invited her to come. And so it was just, you know, it was just so amazing. And so she didn't speak a whole lot of English, and I think the majority of people were kind of about our age. But here was this young girl, and she came, and at the end of it, she said, I've never been to anything like this before. She said, I've only seen this in the movies. And so, but at one point she said, I had asked her to come in and, you know, and fix her tea, you know, what kind of tea would you like? And I said, and I think her name was Marit. And so I said, you know, Marit, would you like to come in and fix your tea? You know, what kind would you like? And she said to me, she said, you knew my name? She said, nobody ever remembers my name. And so I just thought, wow, like, you know, what that meant to her. Another lady who came to that tea, she was Buddhist, and she lived next door to a lady named Angela Fales. And so, and Angela would bring her each month. She would come faithfully. She helped when we moved out. We moved out of that house into an apartment in DC, and her name was Oi. And Oi came and helped us pack all of our stuff and helped us move. And she was a very faithful Buddhist. And so Angela called me probably about 2 weeks ago and said that Oi has come to faith in Christ. And we want to believe that it started with Angela being a great neighbor to her, and the just not immediately sharing the 4 spiritual laws, but becoming a friend to her and loving her right where she was. And so things like that are just so exciting to me. When you actually see fruit, and sometimes we don't see fruit. Sometimes we may never see the fruit of what God has done, but it's so awesome when He does let us see what He's doing. And so after we lived in DC, it was very interesting because I'd read a book about a lady who moved to an apartment building in a big city, and how exciting that was. And I always told my husband I would love to live in an apartment in a big city, just for a few years, just to see what it was like. So it just so happened that our youngest daughter went to college, and my husband got a job in the city. And so we downsized to a 1,000 square foot apartment, and we moved into DC and lived in the Shaw neighborhood. My husband was actually working at the White House, and so he was within walking distance. He could walk to the White House. And so what the cool thing was, we lived in this high-rise apartment building that was a very luxurious apartment building. We had a rooftop pool. We had fire pits up on another roof, an outdoor theater area. So it was a very nice place. But we were actually with a ministry called Apartment Life. And so Apartment Life, it started in Texas probably about 20 years ago. And they intentionally seek out apartment buildings, and they send, we were called a CARES team. And so they send a team in, and basically we were there to create community. And so what the really cool thing about it is, the apartment building is actually paying for us to be there. So they are giving up an apartment. So they give an apartment to Apartment Life. And then they also gave us a budget. I think we had about a $600 a month budget. And so they are doing that for us. They know that we're a faith-based organization. But the reason that they like it is because they know that if people feel like they're a part of a community, they're going to stay longer. They're going to give you better social media reviews. The crime rate is going to go down once people feel like they're part of a community. And so for them, it's the bottom line is the dollar. And so, but they were willing to allow, faith-based, a faith-based organization to come in and to create community for them. And so what we did was, our job was, every time somebody new moved into the apartment, we would go visit them, we would welcome them, give them a little gift and tell them who we were. And then every month we would host 3 different events for that month. And so we could be as creative as we wanted to be. And again, we had this budget. And so, we would have, barbecues upstairs. We would have popsicles at the pool. We would have doggy nights, and, people would bring their dogs, and, so just all kind of really creative things. We would have scavenger hunts. And one year, the year that we were there at Easter, I kept telling Mike, I'm an adult, but I love Easter egg hunts. And so we actually had an Easter egg hunt for the adults. We had one for the kids as well, but we had one for the adults, and the adults just loved it. And then when people were about 2 months before their lease was up, we would go visit them again, and we would, ask them if there's anything we can do to help or whatever. But it was amazing once those people started feeling like they were part of a community. We were able to minister to people. We were kind of in the Shaw neighborhood is a pretty central neighborhood for the LGBTQ community in DC. And so we had a lot of those people in our building as well as in our neighborhood. And you know what? We just loved them. And so something else that the Art of Neighboring, that Dave Runyon had said in the Art of Neighboring, is that there's a difference between ulterior motives and ultimate motives. And so we have to be sure that we don't have ulterior motives in loving people, but that we have ultimate motives. And so by that, our motive wasn't to love our neighbors so that they would come to Christ. Our motive was to love our neighbors. The ultimate motive is that, yes, we would love to see them come to Christ, But that wasn't really what drove us. What really drove us to love our neighbors is the fact that Jesus said, love your neighbors and love me. And he didn't put stipulations on it, so that they come to me. And for me, that was really kind of freeing as well. It was like, wow, like I can love my neighbor and just truly love them. And I'm not responsible for them to come to Christ. I'm responsible to share what Christ is doing in my life and to love them and to be compassionate for them. But I'm not responsible for their salvation. And so for me, that was like really freeing. Like when I, realized that I'm not responsible for that. So just especially living in the apartment building, it was such a great experience, and just kind of really furthered our understanding of neighboring, the results of being good neighbors. And to this day, we moved out of there almost 2 years ago, and we still keep in touch with a lot of the neighbors, and are still involved in their lives. The kids, we have a couple of the kids who write letters to us and, send packages to us. And we have a 16-year-old young girl who lives in a very dysfunctional family. And so it's just been quite an adventure, and we just continue to, to tell God, here we are. And so whatever, you want us to do, we're here to do that. So let me stop, because I could just kind of talk on and on and on. So let me stop. And like I said, I have practical steps to begin or to continue neighboring. But before I do that, does anybody have questions or comments or anything that you want to share?
Michelle, I don't know when we start talking, but one of the things I would like to ask is, when you did your initial going out to decide you were going to do this, you already introduced yourself in the neighborhood. Kind of the very first thing you did, your introduction to the neighborhood, them to you.
Okay. Say that a lot. I don't know if somebody else is not muted, but it was kind of hard to hear you. So
the very first time you did that.
Okay.
When you, like, especially back in Woodbridge, I'll go with the one that I'm familiar with your neighborhood there. Did you go around and introduce yourself before you started this, or was that kind of how you got it going in the first place? Was introducing who you were to your neighborhood?
I think we did, and so here's something interesting, and it was interesting to see how long you guys have lived in your respective houses, because obviously it's easier to do this if you've only lived there a few months, or if you've lived there a year. It's kind of hard to go up to people when you've lived there for 28 years and say, we're neighbors and I don't know your name, and so that is kind of a different thing, but we had only lived there for a few months. And so what I did was we just passed out flyers like on their doors and said, we're having a neighborhood dinner, we'd love to invite you. And so that worked. But I know sometimes it doesn't, and not everybody responded to that. But when we would see them outside, we would say, hey, did you get our invitation? Or, because some people, they're not going to want to come, especially if they don't know you. So that personal invitation is really important. It's, hey, we'd love for you to come over, or we're going to have a street party or whatever you're going to do. But I remember one of the things is, and one of the practical steps that I was going to talk about is us taking the initiative and us taking the first step in doing this. And so we went a couple of years ago, Mike and I, we were in Pennsylvania, and we stayed at a bed and breakfast, and it was in Amish country. And so it was interesting to hear the lady who owned the bed and breakfast. She said when they first moved there about 3 years before that, they went to each one of their neighbors and knocked on the door, introduced themselves, and all of their neighbors are Amish. So they were the only ones who are Englishers, so they're not Amish. But they went to every one of their neighbors, knocked on the door, introduced themselves, and then had a big cookout at their house, and they invited all of these neighbors. And so she said almost every one of the neighbors came, and several of the neighbors said the previous owners of the bed and breakfast had been there for like 10 years and didn't know anybody's name, had never associated with these people. You know, and I'm assuming, you know, they're different, they're Amish, you know, it's kind of awkward, you know. But the Amish neighbors were so grateful that these people came in and wanted to be neighbors and wanted to be nice to them. And, you know, their kids would go over and play, and, you know, they would bring them all their fabulous baked goods and things like that. And so for us to take the initiative and for us to, you know, if you move into a new place, or even if you've been there 28 years, you know, take a cake over, you know, if somebody new is moving in, if they've been there 28 years as well, you can, you know, hey, I was just baking a cake, I thought I'd bake an extra one, you know, and so the other thing is, one of the first things that you want to do in the, you know, taking the practical steps, the first thing that you want to do is to learn your neighbors' names. And so in The Art of Neighboring, that's one thing that he says, is the most important things that you can do is to learn your neighbors' names and to pray for your neighbors. And those are the kind of the first two steps. And so I'm sure that you guys have experienced before when somebody calls you by name. You know, I remember when we were in DC, and, you know, obviously we're in the middle of the city. And so we're out walking the dog one night, and from afar, we can hear somebody, you know, I can hear them, they're going, you know, they're saying, Michelle, Michelle. And I'm like, who knows me, you know, in the city? And it was one of our neighbors. And so when you use people's names, like, that is so important. It makes them feel like, wow, like, she really remembered my name. And, you know, she must really, you know, think that I'm valuable to remember somebody's name. Like, the name is so important. And I think it goes a long way. So that's kind of how we started doing it.
So I'll start speaking, since you talked about living somewhere 28 years.
Yeah.
So last summer, almost a year, I had been praying, and so had my husband, about we felt like now that our kids were so old and didn't need us,
Mm-hmm.
we were ready to step into a new type of serving, but we weren't really sure what direction to go. Our serving had always been just with women's ministry, men's ministry, or with children. And over the last 5 or 6 years, we've watched our neighborhood flip. And so I felt God calling me to neighbor. And so when I first laid that out to my husband, he was like, no. He was like, I've lived here all my life. And he has. So we built a house on family land.
Okay.
And so, like, we're stuck between his grandparents' home place and his parents. And then aunts and uncle and cousins live behind us down a dirt road. Okay? And they all go to Poplar Springs Baptist Church. And everybody on this road, when we first got married, went to that church.
Uh-huh.
So their church and their neighborhood, it was all together. They all knew each other. I can remember, because I'm from a different town, but even when we were engaged and they gave us a shower there, like, every one of my neighbors came.
Mm-hmm.
And through our wedding, the birth of our children, all those older people who have now mostly died off, they neighbored us. And I have done a horrible job of neighboring because I was a freshman in college when I got married. So we invited our college friends to our house and our high school friends. We didn't worry about the old people around us. And then we started having children, and we never attended the church on this road. We always went to my home church. So in our circle of friends, we always had them to our home, but never anything with our neighbors. So as people have died off, we now have a generation of young people moving in, but they don't attend that church either.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know my names, and I don't know their names.
Mm-hmm.
So long story short, my husband thought I was crazy. And he said, why don't you just start with the women? And, you know, he was like, I don't know if I want all these strangers in our house and this kind of thing. So, but slowly he's warmed up to it.
Uh-huh.
And I created a Facebook page to invite our neighbors to, called Friends of Poplar Springs. And I hosted a cookie swap at Christmas, which was the first thing I did to open up our home. And we went door to door with invites and cookie bags. And out of like the 40 people, we had like 4 households represented. And I haven't done anything since, except I have been praying. And like most every day we walk up and down our road for exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And I pray for people as we go by their houses. So I probably want to talk to you later, not now during our group time, but that's been really hard knowing how I failed miserably in years past. And I feel like they're going to look at me like now, okay, she's weird. I know they've lived in that yellow house forever, and she's just now coming to my door. And so that's kind of slowed me down, I guess. So that's my story. Anyway.
That's super exciting, and you know, and baby steps is, you know. So yeah, I would love to talk to you some more, and there's some great, you know, we've started doing, you know, COVID-19 fire pit gatherings, and so we had one last weekend, and we, you know, just had the neighbors come and they sat 6 feet apart, and we had a fire pit. The policeman came by and said, you guys are doing a great job at, you know, keeping physically distanced, and you know, everybody brought their own drink or whatever they had, and so, you know, there's creative ways that you can do it, and, you know, so yeah, so there's a lot, you know, there's a lot that you can do, and yeah, so thanks for sharing, Michelle. I'd love to connect more.
This Misty, when several years ago I had moved out west and was a long way from home, and so when I moved into that neighborhood, I kind of did a cookie swap and invited probably about 20 people in the neighborhood, and we had about 4 families represented as well, but those were neighbors I had already met. I had a dog then, and as I walked the dog, you know, you would meet different neighbors. Mm-hmm. But that, I guess, to me, that's the part of be thankful for those who are there and not those who don't come. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because here, I kind of, not similar, but when I first moved in right after and all the COVID stuff started, I thought, you know, how do I pray for my neighbors if I don't know my neighbors? Mm-hmm. And so in just my little building, I decided, I typed up a letter and just said, you know, I'm going to pray for you, and I would love to pray for you by name, but I had only met one of the neighbors, mm-hmm. and nobody responded except for that one neighbor. So that sometimes is disheartening when you're trying to reach out to people and they don't have any interest, I guess is the best way to say it.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I think too, again, not putting that on yourself, not owning that, like you've been obedient, you've done what God's called you to do, and you're not responsible for the results, and trusting that God has, you know, great plans for that. I remember one time when we were living in Woodbridge, and we had a monthly gathering. I don't think it was the monthly Sunday night dinner. It may have been, actually. And our next door neighbor was the only one who showed up. The elderly lady and her daughter. They were the only ones who showed up. And so we were kind of disappointed. But by the end of the evening, she started sharing some very difficult things that they were going through in their family. And it was so obvious to us that she never would have shared had somebody else been there. And so, like, God completely ordained that they would be the only ones there. And so we left that night. My husband prayed for her, and we left that night thinking, wow, like that was so amazing how God worked in that. And we had no idea, and we were disappointed because we didn't have a whole crowd, at the dinner table that night. But yet God had so specific plans for that one family.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. And maybe as things open up, because, we have a beautiful area that we can socialize, but now it's all taped off and they won't allow, and they've taken all the chairs from the fire pit and everything out.
Yeah.
So any common areas have been closed off.
Yeah, yeah. But even like you said, taking a little bag of cookies or a little, bag of something around and just, dropping it at the neighbors' doors and, I'm thinking about you during this time, if you have any needs, let me know, or, there's still things that we can be doing right now, to kind of reach out.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah. Anybody else?
How about someone else?
I think
Sorry.
Well, go ahead, Robin.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Holly. You were unmuted before me.
Oh. I think that was just a question that came to my mind because then I live in the townhouse that I live in. Like our space is only so big, and we don't have a huge backyard area and don't have common spaces.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know like what other thoughts or like if you have anything else to speak to that about when you don't have the space to necessarily have lots of people at one time.
Yeah, and I, when we were living in the apartment, we had 1,000 square feet. It was pretty amazing to us how many people we could fit into this 1,000 square feet, because there were times when we had a lot of people in there. I had a tea at Christmas time, probably one of the most amazing teas that I've had because of the people who came. A small part of the people who lived in the apartments were from Section 8 housing. And so because the apartment building used to be a Section 8 housing apartment building, they tore it down to build this, beautiful, luxurious apartment building. But they had to provide for those 53 families that they displaced. And so those 53 families were able to come back and live. And there were like 300 units total. But anyway, this tea that I had, there were a couple of the older women from the Section 8 housing who came, one with her grandson that she was raising, who was like 3 years old. We had the ambassador from Mauritius, who also lived down the hallway from us. His wife came and brought another friend who was visiting from some other country. And then there was the young college girl across the hallway from me, and she, came. And so it was just an amazing kind of eclectic group of people. And it wasn't a whole lot of people, but it was very powerful. And so, you don't have to have a big crowd. You can have 2 or 3, you can have 3 or 4 people. So you don't have to feel like, every time that you do something, it has to be a big crowd. And, and again, once it starts getting warmer and, there is outdoor space, you don't even have to clean your house. You can do it if you live, in a single family home, you can do it in your driveway. I remember Phyllis last year, Sherry Howard and Sherry Price, they put up a turquoise table. Have you guys heard about the turquoise table? That's another kind of neighborhood movement. And so I'll leave that resource as well. But they actually got a turquoise table. They painted a door and made a table and put it in between their 2 yards. And they had like an ice cream social. And so it's kind of like, you don't even have to clean your house. So you just, have people in your driveway. Or so there's just so many different opportunities, that we have. And kind of thinking outside of the box even. So the pastor at First Baptist Woodbridge, another favorite story of mine is that he was very much an introvert. And so a lot of people will say, I want to reach out to my neighbors, but I'm really an introvert. And, or my husband is an introvert and he doesn't want people in our house. So what Pastor Ray said one day is, he's an introvert. They didn't really entertain people in their home and that type thing. But he had a neighbor down the street who had like the party of the year. Every year he would have this big summer party and everybody would grill out at his house. So Pastor Ray kind of just took advantage of that opportunity. And so he would go down there and be friendly and neighborly and get to know the neighbors that way. And he didn't have to clean his house. He didn't have to cook out hot dogs or anything. like he got it the best way of all. But he was still reaching out to people. He was still investing in people, learning people's names, you know. So, yeah. Were you going to say something, Phyllis?
Let me unmute myself.
You are.
Am I unmuted? Oh, shoot. Where are you guys? Oh, did I lose y'all?
We're here.
Well, I can't see anybody.
Do you see
I think you turned your camera off.
Yeah, do you see your video?
I see me.
Well, we want to see you too.
Okay, go ahead, you guys. I'll figure out what I did.
Okay, see if you see a video little icon. So one of the things that, you know, that in practical steps that I did want to address is, well, actually two things, is, and Phyllis and I talked about this the other day, that sometimes we have fears. And so I would be interested to know kind of what your fears are. Was it Michelle who was talking about, there she is, you know, the fear of what people are going to think because I've lived here for so long and I haven't done anything yet. And so, you know, that's a very valid fear. So what are some other fears or things that kind of scare you about neighboring?
When I was reading the book, The Gospel Comes with a House Key, which is a little bit different than the kind of neighboring that you are describing. My fear was the safety of my home and my children.
Mm.
Because she was very open with who could come in. And I mean, I am totally with loving everyone the way they are and, you know, encouraging everybody to take steps, not pushing. But I also feel like it's my responsibility to make sure my children are safe and our home is a safe place. And that was something that I was like, I just don't know if I could have someone I just met at the gas station who needs somewhere to sleep come and sleep in my house.
Mm-hmm.
That's scary to me. But now I'm all for like the baby steps of inviting the neighbors to come over for a cookout. We have a pool in the backyard. We could actually, Michelle inspired me to do a Facebook group for our little community, and I've had, I don't know, 10 or 11 people join, and it's been a great time to do that because we can't get out and talk to one another. So just to say, you know, how's everybody today, or the storm that came through last night, did you guys get any damage, or you know, need anything? But as far as fears are concerned, that's my major fear. We've also, several years ago, someone robbed our home while we were at work. We never did know who it was, and the boys don't even know it happened. But those kind of things go through my mind, the safe environment for my children.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that there's a reason that her book is called, you know, Radical Hospitality, because she is pretty radical. And even, you know, the thing about, you know, having an open Thursday night dinner every Thursday night, which I love that idea. I have a friend, a young friend, a 25-year-old friend in the DC area, and she does that. And I've always wanted to do that, but it hasn't worked out. We did it a little bit in the apartment, but where we live right now, it's kind of a different situation, and so it hasn't really worked out. And then I also have this fear of, what if I say I'm going to have dinner at my house every Thursday night, and I can't know for sure that I'm going to be here every Thursday night. And so the continuity of it and everything like that. But yeah, so Rosaria is quite a bit, you know, very radical. And I think too, I'm totally with you that you can figure out different ways to do it without having, you know, without compromising the safety of your children. And, you know, because that, I mean, especially in today's world, I mean, sadly, that's a very valid fear. And just something that we need to be aware of and, you know, need to be responsible to do wisely. So, yeah, that's a good one. Anybody else have?
So, one of my husband's reservations, and mine too, but I just kind of thought, oh, well, God will take care of it, was the safety. Because our neighborhood community is not all the faith-believing, church-going, motherly-like families that they used to be. Some of our property are not our property, but the neighborhood has turned into rental property.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know there has been some sketchy things going on around us that used to not go on. And so he's like, what are you going to do when we open up our home? And then they figure out where things are and what we have. And then they come back and rob us. And I did say, well, don't you think they would have already robbed us? But
Yeah.
then he got me thinking when I wasn't really worried about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well,
and
go ahead.
too, just fear of rejection.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, going back to the fact that God is calling me to be obedient, and I'm not responsible for the results. And so for me, that really helps kind of with the rejection thing. That if I reach out to somebody, and I mean, it is a fact, not everybody's going to respond. Not everybody's going to want to be in a relationship. And so, again, our job is to reach out, and if they don't respond, we've done our job, and we can still pray for them. And I think, too, focusing on doing things outside. I think for me, doing outside, barbecues or, street parties or things like that. And then as you get to know people, better, you can kind of discern who you would like to have in your home. If you were to start a Bible study, or if you were to have, a monthly Friday night dinner, who you would feel safe having in your home. So, yeah. Anybody
Michelle,
else?
have you ever had a time when you have been disappointed in the results? Perhaps you have different results now, maybe it was a long time ago, but you had to lay it down or anything like that, like what Michelle was just saying and others were saying that, I need to make this work. If it doesn't work, maybe it's me. Have you ever had that opportunity? I know Oi to be to the Lord, and that was really cool,
But again, that took, probably 3 years. And I think, there are times, like I said, when we were in the apartment building, we would have events and there wouldn't be a great turnout, or we wouldn't see, kind of the results that we were hoping for. So there's definitely disappointing, when you reach out to somebody and they totally don't respond to you, or, they're not interested, or, that type thing. But I think, and on the other hand, when they do, so there was a lady who lived in the apartment building who was a very sickly woman, lived by herself, couldn't get out of the apartment when she was in a wheelchair. She was very needy. And so the apartment staff gave her our phone number. We gave them permission, but gave her our phone number. So she would call us 2:00 in the morning, and just rant and rave about the apartment staff, how mean and nasty they were, and they were trying to kick her out of our apartment, and blah, 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 and everything. And so we made it a point, like, we tried to be available to her. We would go out of our way to go up and visit her because we knew nobody else was going to go visit her. And so that's kind of another aspect, is that, sometimes it's not convenient. People need you at times that are not convenient. They need you for things, that you don't really want to do. I remember Cynthia Heald was talking one time about how she's written a bunch of books, Becoming a Woman of Excellence. But she was talking about one time she was in the kitchen and she's making tea. And so she asked her husband, honey, would you like a cup of tea? And he's like, well, I think I'd really like a cup of hot chocolate. And she's just like, I wasn't asking if he wanted hot chocolate. Like, that's something I have to totally do different. Like, I was asking if you wanted tea. And, so it's kind of like, sometimes things are inconvenient. People are inconvenient. And, it's part of the calling to love them. And it's part of, getting ourselves out of the way and putting others ahead of ourselves. And so there's definitely, it's not all fun. It's not all, this is such a great thing and, you're going to see results and everything like that. Sometimes it's kind of hard down in the trenches work. And honestly, even now, I think more so in the apartment building, when I would come home from work, a lot of times I would just want to hide. Like, I don't want to see my neighbors. I don't want to be friendly. I don't want somebody to come and ask me for something. I don't want to go out of my way. I just want to go hide. And so, you know, and I would have to kind of force myself to, you know, okay, I'm going to go down to the lobby. I'm going to wait for the kids to come home from school and, you know, play with them and see how their days went. Or, you know, at 4 or 5 o'clock when everybody's coming in the building from work and checking their post office boxes, a lot of times Mike and I would try to be down there just to kind of greet them and welcome them back to the apartment and how was your day? And, you know, and I'm thinking some days it was just like, I don't want to see anybody. And that's the reality of it. And, you know, and saying, you know, it's okay. God knows that, you know, he doesn't expect us to be, you know, on it, you know, 24/7. And, so there are definitely boundaries and limits. And, you know, I think it goes back to a heart attitude of, you know, this is what God's calling us to do. And, you know, we want to do it well. So.
How about somebody else? Something from the book that you wanted to share, Michelle, or something from an experience you've had?
I'll ask another question.
Yeah.
I know, like in the book, a lot of it was like her church family and her neighborhood together when they would come for gatherings, and it was just like this big community. Did you guys did y'all incorporate your church family in this, or is this something that was strictly neighborhood? And how do you see those two things kind of working together, or are they totally separate?
No, I don't think they are. So another thing that was really cool about Apartment Life is that they placed you in an apartment that was within 5 miles of your local church, so that there could be a partnership. And so we did it kind of backwards. We actually moved into the city and we didn't have a local church. And so we told them, place us into an apartment building and we will find a church within 5 miles of where the building was. So the interesting thing was, we were the first building in DC proper to become an Apartment Life, to have a cares team there. But what was so interesting is one of the churches that was about a mile, well, their offices were like the next block over from us. But they met in a church. They met in a school that was about a mile from our apartment building. And we had heard about this church. They had been a church plant 7 years ago and kind of had become a pretty thriving church. And so we contacted the pastor and, you know, kind of got together and talked to him and everything. And he said he had been praying for 7 years for Apartment Life to come to DC. And so we're like, well, then, you know, we don't even have to pray anymore because, you know, this is obviously where God has called us to be. So I really see, and this is something else that we were very intentional about, especially when we were in Woodbridge, is that when we would have these monthly gatherings, or every year we would have a big Christmas open house, and we would invite people from our church, people from our neighborhood, people that we had been stationed with in previous years, friends of the kids. They would invite their friends, and so it was just like this conglomeration of like mismatched people who didn't even know each other. And it was we invited the post office lady, the postman, letter carrier, and she came. And so it was just like, you know, people that we lived with in Norway are talking to our neighbors across the street, and really the only thing that they have in common is that they know us. And it was so amazing to see conversations. And they invited the post office lady to church. And so I think it really goes hand in hand, is, you know, when you have other believers. And so with Apartment Life, we were very intentional to get people from our church to come and help volunteer, because that way they were also building relationships with people in the building. And we could hear them inviting, you know, our neighbors to church. And so I think it's like hugely important, and what a great strategy to, you know, to incorporate your church friends with your neighborhood and with your other friends. So yeah, I think that's a great thing.
So, sorry.
No, you go ahead. That's what I was going to see. Something.
Yeah, no. One of the things that was just kind of making me think of was like, and one of my thoughts from this book
too. And like we've said, she's a little bit radical in her hospitality and her neighboring. But one of the questions that made me have was kind of when she laid out her schedule about how there was literally something every single day of the week, as far as having people in their face and things like that. And so I think for me, sometimes I guess I lean a little bit more introverted, especially more introverted than my husband. And so I think for me, I get, or just feeling a little overwhelmed sometimes with the schedule of things and like how much is too much. And especially with little kids, it's just a different world. And so I know that there's seasons and like how that changes obviously through the different seasons of life, but like how do you balance that? How do you, and it probably is some of just, you know, each family is going to have to work that out for themselves, but kind of what kind of access, what's too much, what, you know, those kind of thoughts that cross my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great thing to consider, and I think we do. You need to figure out your limits, your boundaries. But something that I kind of thought about when you were talking about, especially when you have kids, is that how you can incorporate, you know, so if you have small children, the idea of you having a play date or, you know, having another family over, you know, it's kind of a natural thing, you know, then you have somebody for your children to play with and, you know, and you can get to know the adults. And so trying to figure out how to do it so it's not like something totally different that, you know, is not kind of out of your natural realm, but just kind of incorporating it into your everyday life. You know, if you have neighbors who don't go to church, you know, could it be that you pick their children up on Wednesday evenings or on Sunday mornings or whatever and take them to church with you? And, you know, oh, by the way, you know, we're going to have soup and sandwiches for lunch today. You know, why don't you guys come over and, you know, and we'll have soup and sandwiches for lunch and, you know, and then you can collect your kids afterwards, or, you know, we're having tacos, you know, Wednesday night before church, or, you know, just somehow incorporating it into what you're already doing. You know, if you walk at night, you know, could it be that you end up, you know, inviting a neighbor to walk with you, or, you know, something like that. So, yeah, so maybe that would give you some ideas of kind of incorporating it into what you're already doing.
I think those are great ideas. I think about when my kids were growing up and my son, the baseball families that we, and the kids at school. And if it go back to when I lived out west, you know, my neighbor 2 houses down was Mennonite, but she and I were walking buddies, and she was such a godsend to me of a lot of lonely time and being away from family. And she even invited my son and I to have Thanksgiving dinner with them that year. So that is a great idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
Are y'all done? Anybody else have anything else they want to share? Brenda, I haven't heard from you, lady.
I think she's muted.
I want to say something. I'm sorry, Miss Brenda.
I was hitting the mute button on the little picture. No, I was just saying, I have a couple of observations. I mean, such good conversation about everything that you presented to us, Michelle. But I got to thinking, particularly Robin and you, Michelle, too. And by the way, our Michelle and Robin are sisters-in-law, so they know each other quite well. Spend a lot of time together, married to brothers. But you know, Michelle, with you living in the same place 28 years or whatever, and you know, having all these people there, and with Robin, you worried about you know, the safety issues and stuff with your little boys, and that's viable. I you know, both things are for sure. But I got to thinking these times that we're in right now with this coronavirus, what a perfect opportunity really to start doing things with neighbors, even if we haven't been prior to this, because we've all been stuck in our homes. People may be more willing to get out and want to do things with people, but we do them outside because we're supposed to be social distancing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I haven't been having people, this family, come into my house.
Mm-hmm.
If friends have come over, we've stayed outside and we've gone on the dock or something. We've kept social distancing. But I just got to thinking maybe it's just for me too. I thought, well, it's a good opportunity. You don't have to worry about cleaning your house, like I said, or having things perfect. Just, send out a note or something and say, hey, we've all been stuck inside. Let's just get out and chat and see how everybody's doing, or buy a bunch of popsicles for the kids and let them share that or whatever. I mean, it could be a whole bunch of things. But anyway, I just got to thinking this might be really a good timing for us to start if we have some, some things like that are worrisome to us. But I guess for you, Michelle, our presenter, Michelle, what I got to thinking about, because particularly after reading the book that we just read, I mean, radical's a good word for it, because as much as I love opening my home to people, that's a radical thought for me to do it in the way that she does. But I guess one thing that I wanted to either confirm and put emphasis on that you said is that with Rosaria, she definitely had a plan for their meetings.
Yeah.
They broke bread and shared a meal and stuff, but I'm not saying she had ulterior motives, but she had a plan for her evening, something that they followed. They sang songs and they did things like that. With you and what you do with neighboring, is it really more breaking bread and making friends and sharing your faith more by how you live rather than maybe what you said, particularly right away, as you're just inviting people over? Or do you have certain things that you try to, certain things of faith you try to talk about during your evenings or your get-togethers, or other than saying maybe a blessing, at the beginning of the meal?
Mm-hmm.
Is there something you try to incorporate into each gathering?
Yeah, and that's great. And I think too, reminding ourselves that we're not called to be Rosaria. So, I don't have to do it the way that she does it. Like, there's lots of as many different people as there are, is as many different ways that we can do, the neighboring thing. But for us, we felt like it was really important to establish relationships, to be able to earn the right to share our faith with people. And it does come naturally in that we share, whatever's going on in church. Sometimes it's kind of an easier way because my husband is a pastor. And so, that people kind of obviously already know where we stand. Sometimes it's not, people don't want to talk to you or don't want to come to your house because your husband's a pastor. But for us, kind of developing that relationship and earning the right to share, but along the way, feeling free to share, kind of what God's doing in our lives, or, we have a bunch of kids and, and kind of what God is doing in their lives. And, just kind of being intentional in not so much, and I appreciate Rosaria's, the way that she does that, where they had the Psalter and they, had the hymn singing, that type thing. That's really cool. But I don't feel like that's kind of what God's calling us to do. But we definitely, I think that people would definitely know that we're believers, that we have faith in Christ, by the time they would leave our house, or by the time that they would leave, just because it's just kind of a natural thing, that we just kind of naturally talk about, about church or what God's been doing, which is another thing that's really great, to have another family or another friend that, who is a believer, because, conversations happen and people kind of get caught in the middle of, these people talking about what's going on at church, or, how they were in a tough spot and really, prayed, and, asking people, how can we be praying for you? That's one thing that, asking your neighbors, this is a really scary time. We've never done this before. Is there something specific that I could be praying for you? So yeah, I mean, just kind of letting it be known, without feeling like you have to, hi, my name is Michelle, and, if you died tonight, would you know that you would go to heaven?
Right.
So, that, I'm sure that works for some people, but that's not really what we feel like we're called to do. So yeah, does that help?
Oh, absolutely. And I just wanted, that's what I kind of knew, but that's what I wanted to make clear. But,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Rossi, did you have a question, or did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. I've been living in Greenwood for about, I say about, 2020, about 16 years. And in that time, I've lived in, like 3 different neighborhoods. This being the longest one that I've lived in. And in each, every neighborhood is different, but the neighborhood I'm living in now, it's kind of like my neighbors are older, and they really just they've been here a long time, and they really just keep to themselves. I'm like, because my next door neighbor that's to my, both, on both sides, I'll be sitting in the yard, like I was sitting under my carport 2 days ago, and they came out their backyard, and I'm sitting on my porch, and I spoke, and they just act like they didn't hear me. So I'm like, when you have situations like that, and even me and my daughter went walking up the road, up and down the street yesterday, and it was a couple of neighbors standing out in their driveways, and we spoke, some spoke back, some didn't. So when you have people who you've spoken to, trying to break the ice to see how friendly are they, and they don't return your, hospitality, so to say, what are you to do then if, that kinds of happen? Because that goes into the fear of, okay, they don't want to talk to me. And, the way my brain processes stuff, I start thinking all of these thoughts about, okay, well, maybe it's because I don't look like them, or, maybe because I'm younger than them. So, how do you do that when you're trying to take that first step and it's not reciprocated?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I would say don't give up. Don't be pushy, but don't give up. And, and they may never have had neighbors who wanted to be friendly. And so now all of a sudden to have a neighbor who, wants to know your name and wants to, be nice and, get to know you, it might be like totally foreign to them. And, I'm thinking, if, with your daughter, kind of practical things, could your daughter, make them cookies and take it over one day? Or I've seen a lot of people, it's funny because even in our neighborhood, I've seen a lot of the kids who are like painting rocks. And so they just get rocks and paint them. And, one said the other day, we found it in the woods, and it said something about, I hope you're having a great day. Love, Raymond, or something like that. And one had, flowers on it, and it had a little thing that said hope on it. Could just little things that maybe your daughter could, kind of help break the ice and, take something over to them, or, leave something on the doorstep, or, but just, yeah, like I said, I wouldn't give up, but I would just continue to be friendly, and you know, and see, you know, maybe it's going to take a few times, you know, before they, you know, and like I said, it may just be kind of be a totally foreign thing to them that, you know, that somebody's interested in them or somebody wants to get to know them. So, yeah.
Because I do notice that I'm the only house on my street that opens up their front door. Everybody, if they're not going to their car or out there cutting grass or something, except for one neighbor across the street, and his name is Sam. I do know him. He's out in his yard all the time. But other than me and him, everybody else, you know, they come out, do what they have to do, and they go in the house. They don't try to make any interaction. And I was like, and I noticed, I'm the only one on my street that ever opens the front door. No one else opens the front door. So I'm like, it's just amazing to see some things.
Yeah. And some people, you know, they wouldn't think about, you know, if somebody lives next door to me and I don't have anything in common with them, why would I want to associate with them, or why would I want to get to know them? Or, I mean, some people, it's just totally off of their radar. So, and another thing, you know, I would encourage you just to keep praying and, you know, asking God what the next step is. So,
I think, you know, it's kind of funny, but I think of like David, my boyfriend. He always laughs when we go to these craft things and you see the signs welcome, and he wants a sign for his front porch that says go away. So there are people who are not circle.
Yeah. I wrote a blog a long time ago about, you know, somebody with a welcome sign, and like, what does that really mean? Like, do you really, you know, if I went up and knocked on their door and, you know, but you have a welcome sign out here, you know, they're probably thinking, well, I didn't really mean that. So, yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything else they'd like to share? Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It was interesting, all the different comments y'all made. I could identify with just about every single one, every single situation I feel like I've been in at one point or another. And I think we're going to have a great conversation the rest of the night. And I really appreciate it for you to come and get us going on this. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'll say one more thing kind of in closing, but just something else that's kind of you know, I think and again, I wrote a blog one time called What Not to Say to Your Neighbor, and so, and again, it was when we were stationed in South Carolina, that I had this neighbor who lived across the street from me, and I was, I think, deathly ill. My husband was deployed. I had 5 children under the age of 8. You know, I had decided that night that the 5-year-old was going to be in charge of dinner because I was so sick, and, you know, I was just laying in my bed. And so I remember, and obviously, once again, we live on base. It's a safe place. We don't lock our doors. And so the phone rang, and I thought it was my husband, and it wasn't. It was Jo Lynn, who lived across the street. And so she just said to me, you know, you're not feeling well. I'm going to come over and get the kids. And so I'm just like, whatever, you know. So sure enough, she came over. She got all 5 of my kids, took them back to her house, fed them dinner, and then came back and put the baby was 6 months old, put the baby to bed, and the other kids, I think, were watching a movie or something like that. And so it just dawned on me, it's like, she didn't say to me, you know, oh, you know, I know you're sick, just let me know what I can do, or let me know what you need, or, you know, if you need anything, just, you know, let me know. Like, she actually took action and thought, okay, this would be something that would be practical, that would be helpful, so I'm just going to do this. I'm not going to ask her, you know, oh, if you need any help with your kids, because who doesn't need help with their kids when they're, you know, sick and dying and their husband is out of town. And so So really just looking for ways that you can minister to people without saying to them, you know, what if you saw somebody who was having a hard time and you took them flowers just because, or if, you know, a mother is going crazy in her house and you say to her, you know, I'm going to Starbucks, I'm going to pick up a couple of drinks, what would you like for me to pick up for you? Or I'm going to make you dinner tonight, what time would you like for me to bring it over? You know, would you like pizza or would you like chicken? And so really taking the initiative to just be proactive and don't sit around and wait for people to, you know, come to you and say, you know what, I've really had a hard day. It would sure be nice if somebody would bring me a meal tonight. You know, or it would be really nice if somebody would come and get my kids for a couple of hours, you know, so that I can rest. But instead saying, you know, I know you've had a hard day. I'm going to take your kids, you know, let them come and play at my house for a couple of hours. So anyway, so just being very intentional to be proactive and take the first step. So yeah, I think I'm done. and I'll send those resources to you. And yeah, so I've got a Facebook group that you guys are welcome to join, Neighboring with North Star. I send out an email once a month. I sent one out today. And so if you're interested in those resources, I would love to connect with you again. Phyllis has my information. If anybody wants to connect with me one-on-one, that would be great. So, yeah, I'm excited.
I am too. It's been great to have you. It's good to. Michelle is one of the best people for getting to know other people, and she just comes into a situation and she does exactly some of the things she said tonight. So, thanks so much for being with us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I'll do. Thank you.
You're welcome. Nice to meet you guys.
Bye-bye.
All
Have
right.
a great next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.